So team, welcome back to our final session for SDET, which primarily stands for Software Development Engineer in Test. Okay. So someone who's been working in software development and made a move towards test automation. So our primary stack that we were looking were Selenium, WebDriver, Core Java, JUnit. We went about automation frameworks, and we also discussed on a little bit on Jenkins. And Jenkins, did we team? I don't think so. But GitHub, oops. GitHub, I believe we did. Okay. Now, team, do note there are trainings that are starting next week, in which I plan to go over a few more topics again, though it will be based on Python. There will still be a lot of coverage that will happen accordingly. Now, what are the topics that were left or need more attention? That I remember, I'm going to start mentioning it here. And we want to be able to find sessions and go over them. Okay? And you also let me know, team, what else you remember. Because must have missed out. We'll take a look at every code briefly that we did so far. Before that, one is advanced element identification, especially when it comes to applications where elements are changing consistently, they're dynamic, there is no specific property that we can start with. Any questions, anyone? I see one hand raised. Don't know, I believe from someone new. The second topic that I would love to spend a little bit more time are the Git and the GitHub. So both what are the Git commands that we can do and the GitHub. More integration on that. Also on Jenkins, on how we can manage our jobs, run our frameworks, and build on that. What else do you remember, team, that we may have missed out? Please let me know. Meanwhile, let's go through what I've done. I'm going to place the entire code on GitHub. Okay, so right now I believe there's only KDF, form, and hybrid framework there in GitHub. I'll place even the previous ones. Let's take a look, team, what we did and what I'm expecting you all to do. This is one batch of automation testing using Selenium and Java that you've gone through. Then if you go to under Selenium, you will find a lot of batches, team. I would strongly recommend for you to pick up at least 2 batches. One you're going through with me, maybe pick up one more, which is there. Weekend crash course is fine, but I would suggest maybe here, automation framework, Selenium, WebDriver, Java, like April 2019. This would be very similar to what we have done in our current training batch. Apart from that, we may have used different applications, and the flow could be slightly different. So please check that out. Again, you'll have a lot of sessions within each. So this has got about 25 in total. And go through them as a Netflix series, team. Do not try and pause too much, rewind, and so on. Keep it more like a Netflix series. It'll be like, don't repeat anything. Keep going. Take notes till you get comfortable. Then start practicing, team. At least one batch. Just take notes on the side. Get the overall idea. Second batch, start practicing. So you have multiple batches like that you can mix and learn from. Each batch by itself has got a lot of content, team. So day 22, watch the previous SDET videos. Okay, and let's talk about what we did. So I think we started with very basic level. Uh, in the Google Drive, it is not very well organized team. I've not got all the code put together into one structure. Only KDF and beyond, we've got it covered nicely. So what I'll do is we'll talk about the code as a document. We are now in a stage where we can read code. So that'll be good for us. Let's see what we did in day one. So we were talking about how we will progress by building simple framework, then learning more Java, Selenium WebDriver, element identification, read write from Apache. I think this is how we've progressed, team. And then project 2, we took JUnit, we developed keyword-driven framework, how we do error handling, simple loops concepts that we've developed, complex web apps and how to handle dynamic apps. I think this is the one that we wanted to have a specific one for advanced element identification. Page object model and page factory framework. So we've seen one version, we're going to see another version of it. Okay. Now, what is it that we started with? Let's see. I'm sure that we would have started with something very simple, like a mortgage calculator. So these are all Java code, team. Let us keep our eyes in trying to read code, okay? Very critical as we keep going in this journey that you become fluent at reading code and understanding what a piece of code does. And that does not have to be through an editor with a beautiful colored code with everything highlighted correctly for you, references. It could be a simple text code, and that is fine. Our ability to read code is very, very important. And then we can get into the writing code part of it. So what is this doing? It's using the Selenium WebDriver for Chrome. We also will look at cross-browser. Primarily, here we have to point to the other drivers. Again, how do we do it correctly? I just want to make sure that it's there. There was the code. I think it's here. So look at it. So print statements, some of the first building blocks in Java. Then we went about creating our WebDriver object called MyDE and pointing it to a new Chrome driver. I'm maximizing it, not put any browser timeout in this case. Then what are we doing? We are navigating to. So once I know it's a driver of type Chrome, then there are methods related or associated with it, like navigate, find element, and so on. So here first we're navigating to that application under test. Then we are finding an element using ID as the methodology, and then using the command called send keys to send values into the text field. So I'm printing onto the screen and I'm also performing it on the application. And finally, what we did is a simple if statement. And this is where we've learned to do a little programming now. Sorry. See, when we come to programming, it is all about having a ground set of rules given and written it in a code, and the program needs to take the decisions going forward, what to do under certain circumstances. So for example, the simplest one is your thermostat that you see at home, right? Let us say you set it up to 72 Fahrenheit and it drops to 71, then it starts to heat it up. So it always keeps checking, hey, has it dropped below that specific number? So these simple devices that can understand and behave by itself require these building blocks called if statements that help us to compare things and say that, okay, if this is the case, then do certain activities. If this is not true, then we do something else. So in this case, what we're doing, we're getting the actual EMI from the application under test. At that point in time, after I've entered my input, after I clicked on the calculate button, then we are saying, okay, let's get that value that is there. How are we getting that, team? We are first going to the driver, which is our browser. We're finding an element using this long XPath that is there. Okay. How did we obtain this XPath? I did not sit down and count and say, okay, this is first div under the next child div and all that. I simply right clicked on the application and said inspect element. So we're talking about something like this. We click on calculate and we get this data. So right click and I say inspect. So once I get to that code portion of it, I right click here and I go to copy, and that is where I get my XPath. Okay. So this XPath will give me the address to how to get to that element. Now I have not used my own skill of science into it because I depended on a tool in this case. But your skill of identifying elements is very, very important. So practice a lot on XPath, more and more XPath writing. So that was the first one. Then let's see what we did with the second. I'm sure we have made some changes to it. It's almost the same so far. I see the same print statements. I don't see anything different except the fact that maybe numbers changed, and we're trying to see how it will behave for different sets of data. Now what we did is interesting. This is where we have introduced ourselves to variables as the simplest containers that any programming language gives us. So when I start a program, when I see a statement like this, it is one, declaring a variable called h-value and saying that it is going to be of type string. Two, also initializing it and putting a value into it and saying that whenever I want to use h-value, I'll get this value. They are variables, so I can change them at any point in time that I want. So now instead of hard coding the number or what we put into the application as the home value, down payment, and expected EMI, we have replaced that with variables. So that became our next level towards programming. Is everyone with me? Can I get a nod, please? This is our last class, kind of going through what we have done code by code, so we get a good deeper insight. Everyone with me, team? Just got one answer. Continuing then. Any questions? Let me know, please. So what about the next one? So variables done. Wow. See, we first wrote a very simple code. Then we have an if statement to something there. Then we created variables. Now we're saying, let's repeat this. Why should I test it for one set of data? I want my program to repeat itself so that I can continuously check for a given or group set of data. So in this case, I'm having a variable called I, that is my counter, and using my for loop to iterate I starting from 1 till 4, and each time incrementing I by 1. That's our syntax for the first loop. Now, what we're doing here is interest rate is a number, typically 1%, 2%, 3%, 3.33, 4.12. So percentage that is there. It is not necessarily an integer, but in this case, what I'm saying is let us take 1, 2, 3, 4, like 4 values each time, and interest rate is the only thing I'm changing. So interest rate, whatever is there in I, I'm converting it into string first and then back to integer and putting it here. Okay, integer and taking I as integer and taking it as a string and putting it here. Now, same variable, same everything, the whole script loops through a few set of times. But all that is still there for us, hard coded in the code itself. So how do we make it a little bit more reliable? So what we did is look at how we did functional decomposition here. So far what you saw was linear. Now it's functional decomposition. Instead of having that entire code of logic in that for loop, I broke it down into just 4 portions. Get my interest rate, start MC app, input test data, compare results. And each one is a reusable function. We said how we created start MC app, how we created input test data, how we created compare results. 3 independent functions under the same class. Now that we have this, it is easy for us to look at code in a simplistic manner. Otherwise, as our code increases, you will notice that we'll have to scroll down a lot of code to look at. So for a first time reader, it may not be very easily understandable. So this becomes a much more simpler way to present the code using functions. And the beauty of functions comes to us when we talk about reusing them across multiple places. Now what we did, this is where we have introduced the concept of arrays. Variables hold single cell value. It could be string, integer, double, float, long, boolean. Then we have arrays. Arrays are nothing but, think of them like a variables as independent homes that have specific address to each variable. So postman when or a FedEx when has to deliver, will have to look at that address, come to that home, and once you knock on the bell, that you're there at that home. On a contrary, with an array, it is like an apartment complex. Okay, you have an address to that apartment building complex. So you get there. Once you get there, you need to tell: is it unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, unit 4? Which unit is it? And then if you have multiple floors, then which floor, which unit? If you have then multiple blocks, then which block, which floor, which unit? That becomes a single dimensional, 2-dimensional, or multi-dimensional arrays. In this case, we created a single dimensional array and we said my H value will contain these 4 values. Down payment, these 4. Interest rate, these 4. Expected EMI, these 4. Now, one of the most important and simple questions that should come to us, team, is all these are numbers, correct? We're working on numbers. Then why are we using double quotes? All right, I can understand for something like an expected EMI where I have a dollar sign and all and a decimal and all that to compare. Maybe I need a string. But why do I need them here? Anyone? Very, very important thing. Why would we need this to be string? Why shouldn't this be integer or double? I'm expecting answers, team. Perfect, Shavanti. Not to write and read from Excel. That we can change if we want. But in fact, in an Excel, you can put whatever we want. The only main reason is when we look at application under test, well, this is a number. How do we put information there? We use the send keys method within Selenium WebDriver. When we use the send keys method, it takes input as a string. That method takes it as a string. And hence, we have to send it as a string. That is the only reason. Okay. So, though it's a number, we will have to put it as a string when it comes to send keys team. That is the reason. Send keys can take integer or double, then that's fine, but it takes only string. And for each of these, I want you to go in and go back to the videos, start relating it to it. So this must have taken us about a week's time to discuss all these basics. I saw simple my class one. What is my Selenium code one? I think very simple one. So when you're starting to practice, start with things that are as simple as this, and then add one step at a time. Associate one jar file after the other, and slowly build on it. Okay to use from GitHub, but you will not get a complete deeper understanding. Okay, what is this? Next project one, day one. So I think what we've been discussing in each day as we went along, how we install JDK, IDE, Selenium, Chrome driver, getting started. And I think we went through slowly all of these programs. And we discussed also on NEOT Excel. But most importantly, what is it that we finally did was here in the keyword driven framework. So if I'm not wrong, let's see what did we do in SW1. I'm going to close all of them, team. Right click, close all. SW1. So this is one simple one, Southwest one. And I introduced you to the concept of JUnit here, where we have something that can be done before every test, and then you could do something after every test. So in this case, when we execute, you'll notice that these operations will get executed 4 times. This is my test 1, my test 2, and so on before each of them. And this quit will get executed 4 times after each of them. So simplest way to write a JUnit code instead of Java code. What did we do here? So in here now, see, my ad before has the main loading where I'm getting my browser and navigating it. Okay. So each time I have a test before that, this would get executed. Now, this is my test 1, my test 2, my test 3, my test 4. Very nice. My after test. Give me a second, team. Sorry, team. All right. So from southwest1.java, which is a basic JUnit code, we went to southwest2.java. So I have an ad before. It opens up southwest.com each time. Let me scroll all the way down, see my at after. Yeah, it closes it each time. And during each execution, let's try and read the code again. So I'm basically finding an element for air booking, selecting some code, entering, I believe, Boston out here. And the next time is LAX. And the third time is EWR. So I have 3 tests, each doing almost the same thing, just my data is changing. And that's fine. But the concept that we're trying to learn here is what happens before my test, what happens after my test. And that's a JUnit. programs. Let's see SW3. I have a similar as before. Maybe I changed something additional in these where we've added more team, and this is where we spent a little time also on how we went about identifying each and every element using ID or XPath, whatever works for us. So bunch of tests that we've done there, and that will be very crucial for you to look at them. Okay. And then what is this JUnit 1? Okay, so basically JUnit 1. So before we get into a JUnit, how does a test case look? Test case. So starting the browser, then test case 1, then test case 2. So it goes like a linear flow. There is no structure to it. And I can't see what is happening at each test case. So in scenarios like this, where I have multiple, I don't know why this indentation got spoiled. When I have multiple tests, even if one test fails, team, it would go on to execute the other remaining tests for us. And that's a solid advantage that a framework like JUnit brings. How do you mention what JUnit is, team? JUnit is basically a Java framework that has been built for developers with unit testing in mind. So before they push their code into production or for testing, they want to run their own bunch of tests. So they created this simple JUnit framework that gives them control on what to do, when to do, and how to recover if tests fail and so on. So it's a JUnit, it's a Java framework, and that was built specifically to help in unit testing for the developers. And we are using that to build our automation frameworks as well. So we have a basic non JUnit looking code here, and then slowly talking about JUnit. Then we went to Southwest, and then we had the idea of why should we have all the test logic written here as to step by step. And that is when we went into putting this data into an Excel sheet. And we said, hey, listen, I can store exactly what to do on the application. Instead of writing it in a Java code, I could do it in an Excel sheet. So we went about creating this structure for Southwest initially, and we said, let's write some test scenarios here. And that is where we spent as a team also on our NEOT platform. Okay, so team continue to work on NEOT, and how you use that application to test goes and sits very, very well into your resume. So when you talk about in interviews that, hey, listen, I use NEOT frequently, and this is how it is built, there's a lot of value to it. It can only help to whatever extent possible. So use this skill, keep building on this. So we wrote few test cases. I don't know if they were written here for that application, but I think this is for Sony's car control for a different one. But primarily, whatever Excel sheets we have is being inspired with that template. So I have a test case sheet with a unique test case ID, a description to it, a status, just a column there, maybe ready, not ready. Execute is a flag that tells me out of those dozens or hundreds of test cases which I want to execute in the current run, because these tests may take hours depending on the size of these scenarios that you have. So you want to be able to choose sometimes if you have a shorter testing window. Do you all listen to what I say, team? Every word, because I use this every day, in what I do in a career. So I speak pretty fast. But if you observe, when we began in the day 1, day 2, we were pretty slow. But since this is a summary session, I want it to be a good one for you where you can relate. But I throw in a lot of important keywords that become absolutely valid for you in the context of your career growth. So listen to them again and again, team, and what I mean to say. So once you get that meaning of what I'm conveying on each of these concepts, it is easy to explain. The biggest challenge that I have seen, that I've heard from the students is when I do it, when I explain things, it looks super easy. But when the students get to sit down and do it and so on, it becomes tough. They get stuck. And maybe you resonate with that as a thought. The only thing I say is, even today, for example, when I'm doing coding, I don't copy paste or do anything that is already there. I show it live in the session. It is very critical that we build whatever we do one line, one step at a time. If you're stuck somewhere, go one day back. Go from day 10 to day 9 or day 8, and come back again. So that is the advantage, team, of how these days are structured. It gets complex one day after the other. All right. Having said that, so that's test cases. Then we have test steps. In that is where we've loaded this with content. So for each test case scenario, okay, we have a bunch of steps that the user has to do. Open the application, go to the URL, enter this, enter that, click this, verify this, all good, close browser. Now, for an automation tool like Selenium to understand and perform these tasks, it requires certain activities or certain conditions or certain data. And that can be combined into these 3 columns. The first is a keyword. A keyword meaning, what is it that you want Selenium WebDriver to do? So it gives the instruction that you can perform on it. Next is the element identification, as to how you can identify an element using any methodology. So we are replacing find element here. We're replacing things like send keys, click, clear, those commands out here. Test data is anytime your step requires input data to perform the task, it goes into this test data. These 3 columns become the important step for automation team. When it comes to automation, your thumb rules are ERA, efficiency, reusability, accuracy. Okay, but to make one automation step successful, what does a robot do, team? Nothing but thousands of repeated steps. So you cannot do 1,000 steps, team. You take one step, then you take another step, then you take another step, and so on. How we can give that instructions is using these 3 columns: the keyword, element identification, and the test data. Now what we did is we were teaching our program on how we can read that from the Excel. In fact, team, I missed out a DDF somewhere. Should be here. Keyword driven framework. There is DDF where I would, so there's Java functions, if statements. So as I explained through each and everything, we went there. Team. There you go. So I have DDF1, and this array basics also I've explained. What are arrays? How do we create them? Differentiating. What's the video and the code? So the main difference from the previous code that we saw, team, is that instead of using arrays locally, we started to read it. So we put our test data into an Excel sheet and we were reading it in here. So that way I can execute what I want, and then at the end of it, go back and write it back into my report. So here is the read Excel method. This is where we used Apache POI, HSSF, which is a poor obfuscation interface, horrible spreadsheet format. Basically a plugin that is open source, open license from Apache that lets us to have our Java code interact with the Microsoft Excel workbook. So we use this bunch of steps to read the data. So we went deeply to understand how this works. And then we also spoke about how we can write it back at the end. So our test is basically the same few steps in a for loop. Start MCAP, input test data, compare results. Okay. And then at the end of it, we're writing the Excel. The logic is very simple, team. We read the Excel into a two-dimensional array, go through each row in that and see what has to be executed and get the values that are there. Once you get the values, then your program is already ready. It is very interesting how we created these teams, one after the other. This is what industry wants you to know. Okay, do you know frameworks? Do you know how to code it in? Can you read automation framework code? Can you write as well? So that's how we read and write from an Excel in the case of a data-driven framework. So that gave us the ability to understand that we can take this also further. That is when our KDF driver came to, keyword-driven framework driver. So here, the Excel sheet, MC-test cases to open. Is it there? I don't see MC-test cases to here. There were two different machines I did the trainings from. I'll must the code later. So here, basically, we're going through that Excel sheet and nothing much. We basically put our read Excel and write Excel in place. And before I try and execute the code itself, I just try and print out what is happening. So these print statements can be used very, very effectively for debugging. I also have to show you Eclipse debugging. Okay, so here is where we are reading the data from test cases, and then we created our Selenium executor. So this is a standalone class. Some basics of OOPS is what we started doing here, object-oriented programming, where I have a class created called Selenium executed. And since this is static methods, I can just call this methods. What this does is it is looking at using a switch case, and we spoke about switch case also, how that is different from multiple nested if statements. It will call this corresponding function. Each function has been pre-written where it tells us what it can do. So like this opens a browser, this navigates, closes, type text, click element, click link, verify text, take a screenshot. So all of this have been put into Selenium executed. And what I do is call run test step, and it in turn calls whichever function it wants. Call this run test step, I'll send what keyword, element ID, and test data. Remember those three important building blocks for automation. Now, with that in place, you now have the ability to start maintaining everything at an Excel level. And we spent a lot of time on defect handling. So we spoke about automation. How do we code? How do we use Selenium WebDriver, identify elements, build frameworks? But at the end of it, how do we get results automated as well? Reports automated. So we built things in a way that at the end of a run, I don't need to look at Eclipse. I can rather go and look at what happened to my test cases, what passed, what failed. And then I also look at among the failures, why did it fail and where did it fail? So this gives us a lot of ability to look at what's going wrong with the application. We spoke about how we can do time handling. So in the code, where we start a timer, when each step starts. I believe here time is, and so that's my start time, and after the end of it I get the end time, and then I subtract them, divide by 1000. That will give me time in seconds, otherwise it will give me milliseconds, and I'll put it into the Excel sheet. This, what we are seeing, is definitely in milliseconds, team, not seconds. Must have been from an earlier run. So that's KDF underscore driver 4. So now we have the ability to say that, you know what, I don't necessarily have to do it for one application. I can do it for multiple applications using the same framework. So the same one I used for AnyOut to log into that application, because that's also a web-based application that we should be able to test. And we wrote a bunch of steps corresponding to it. And we said, what should happen at each point in time. So giving the right keyword, the right XPath to it, and the right test data becomes critical for us always. And I've been talking about this, team, how we, so a lot of diagrams that we drew as part of it. So you'll have to go back through the videos to get complete deep insight. Now, as we went along, we started saying that, hey, you know what, why can't we do something additional on it? So one of the important things was try catch, team. Try catch helps us to understand that something has gone wrong with our code or the application, and we want to try that piece of code about it. If there's an error, we'll catch and report it. We will not just give a runtime error like a fatal error, a red message, and fail the entire test execution. So try catch helps us to recover nicely from any defects that arise, and depending on the defect, what is it that we want to do, right? And we went to hybrid framework, team. The thing in hybrid framework was we added test data and element map also. So the concept here was very simple. We said, okay, this is great, test cases tested, or these 3 building blocks. But if my identification for username changes as a field for this application called AnyOut, there may be about 100 test cases where I have to go and change it. So why don't we centrally store this in a repository? That's the idea. The other idea is same with test data. You know what? I may change my test data, and simplest thing that will keep changing is the URL, because you're not testing always on the production. You may be testing also on the QA server, something local like qa.anyount.com and so on, specifically hosted for your testing. Again, you have to go to 100 test cases and change, team, and that's a challenge as well. So what you'll need to really put forward is something that can help you to parameterize, better reuse whatever is there, and make things efficient for us. So remember, I was talking about ERA, efficiency, reusability, accuracy. Efficiency in the sense it should be more efficient than a human. If my scripts are going to run slower, take more effort and resources to do it, it's not efficient enough. And if it takes too much time to maintain for each release, then again I have a challenge on efficiency. Reusability is, you build once, and within 3-4 releases you get your return on investment, and you're reusing whatever you build over period of releases. That's where you get your ROI. And you want to make sure that whatever you're building is with high reusability in mind. Then it is accuracy. So with a lot of this programming or manual operations, accuracy becomes absolutely critical to ensure that we test everything correctly. So now, instead of hard coding them like we didn't do in our code also, we will parameterize them. And that is what we did in hybrid framework as a concept. And we said, you know what, now we'll add 2 more sheets. So I have the names for test data here, not the values. So the names are here, corresponding test data values are here. Tomorrow, I can add a new set of data, maybe for Firefox. Maybe this is qa.leo.com, and different data, and I'll say that this is the one I want to use. But the fact that I have taken test data and parameters, put it as names, and replace that in my test steps with those names. Next one is the element maps. Instead of hard coding them, I've used the names of it. One place I used hard coding specifically so that I showed that the code will work even if it's hard coded for one-off cases or if it is parameterized. And all those details we put it here. What page, what is the name that we have given, and how do we identify it? Now the same thing we reflected in our framework here. How we did that is very simple. We created two functions, get EID and get TD. So we send whatever is there in that column 4 here. So this is column 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we send whatever is there in this column here as an import. And this function simply does one thing, team. It goes through every row in that sheet. We've read that sheet also as a two-dimensional array. And if it finds a match, it will return that. It will come out. If it doesn't find a match and it's finished that entire loop, it will return the value as is. So this way, if it is a parameter like uname, it will go get the value from here. If it is something like button ID, single button XPath as is, it won't find it in this list here in this column, and hence it will return. The same logic for get TD. So team, it is not about writing complex code. It is about writing correct logic into it. Okay. Lot of times I've seen that we unnecessarily complicate what we have just to achieve too much control. Let it work in a base model first. Let the code and the main logic work. Then you can do optimization and so on. So get TD similar. So it doesn't matter if I define A here and B here or repeat A again, because they will die in it. Just for our reading clarity, I changed that way. I defined A here as a counter and B here. Okay. So that is the additional change that we did to it. And primarily now, we also started taking screenshots. So at the end, if issues occur, I would know it at a test case level, but at a test step level, it will also tell me that A login 02, that's the name of the test case, step number 3.png has the screenshot of what happened. So if I go to my folder, we've started creating these screenshots. So these screenshots get created when we are executing our tests. So anything that it thinks is an issue, not only is it putting it into this Excel with details of what went wrong, it is also taking the screenshot. So that's about what we did, team. And all of this code, most of it is there in GitHub for us, but not everything. So I'm having to put all of them over the weekend. KDF is there. I'll put it into new repository. Share. Team, so that's about it from my side. That's the journey that we have taken together so far. And I'm strongly advising to go back and do one more run of all these 20 odd sessions, please. It will give you a lot of, oh wow, whatever you missed in the first time, okay, this is how this tool's applications coding work. Any questions, please, for me? Sure. So, oops, and why we talk static. In interviews, also the mock interviews, also I'll explain why we're defining them as static. But primarily, if I don't define them as static, then it will belong to an object. I have to first create an object and use the methods or variables from that object. If I say static, it will belong to the class. It will be same for all the objects. I'll explain. Java, oops, and so in our learning, we may not have learned everything that Java has to offer, or element identification or WebDriver. When we go through JPACT mock interviews, definitely we get a good idea, but I'll cover these also once again. I have a question about get TD if we have some time functions. Sure. I have a minute or two, team, but depending on if there are more questions from others. Let's see. Yes, Bhargavi.
Hi, Karthik.
Yes.
We are using two return statements in these functions. My question is like, if the first return is working, so it will exit from the whole function, and the second return statement will not be executed.
That is correct.
Okay.
So it will come out of the function itself. If that is there,
okay.
it will come out.
Okay.
So if it has not come to return line 122, then it will definitely do line 125.
Okay. That's what my question is. Like, if both the returns will work, definitely it will be returning FEID. And so how?
Okay. It's not like a break. It is returned from the function itself, where it is being called from.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Get out.
Thank you.
Sure. You're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. I have one more question on the chat. What is the best practice to call methods either with static or by referencing performance view? It is more about security view, I would say, than performance. Okay. See what will happen if I make static, right? Any objects using it will also start having that data. Okay. So in our framework, we just needed static because to modularize it, not to create object instances or inherit anything from there. So we've used very basic one. Can we get code for all projects? You'll get code for all this training. Okay, I'll sit it together and share it. All right, great. Thank you, everyone. And next week we're starting with Python as well. So members, welcome to participate. Look forward. And take care. Thank you all. Thank you so much.